Funding for the production of Folks is provided in part by the Friends of LPB.
Most whites don't understand. They feel that they can represent us as good as anybody else, you know, and it's not true.
If you're not looked at or perceived as being a major candidate, then you won't get your campaign off the ground. We were fortunate enough to gather several major newspapers' endorsements in the state, which kind of gave our candidacy credibility.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rob Hinton.
And I'm Genevieve Stewart. Is voting power the only clout minorities have? And if so, why is there so much apathy among black voters?
These are just two of the questions we'll be discussing as we talk politics today on Folks.
Everybody says folks, just plain old folks. Everybody just people all over the world. Folks are live, folks got to give, folks got to care, ooh, folks got to share. Our world is small, so very small. What touches all, ooh, touches us all. To stay alive, just to survive, folks got to be in harmony. Everybody just folks. Just plain old folks. Just plain old folks. Everybody just folks. Everybody just folks. Just plain old folks. Just plain old folks. Everybody just folks.
A lot of us can recall the marches and demonstrations in the 1960s that led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It was also back in the 60s and early 70s that we began to see blacks elected to Congress, mayors of major cities, and to local governing bodies. For example, in Lafayette, Louisiana, it wasn't until 1976 that blacks made gains in local politics, gains that resulted from court battles. This is the Lafayette City Council. For many years, it was an all-white body. That is, until 7 years ago, when Wilfred Pierre, the man on the left, was elected to council from a newly created district that was, and still is, predominantly black. Pierre's election was just the beginning of black representation on local governing bodies in Lafayette. This is the Lafayette Parish Courthouse. It is here that the police jury meets. 15 people make up the jury. 2 of them are black. Now that number is being threatened by something called home rule.
We cannot have efficient government at the expense of representation. And that's what it boils down to. If we get proper representation, I'd gladly vote for the charter. I think it's basically, the charter is good, but I lose representation. We can't, as a group, support something that we lose.
Lafayette has 11,000 registered black voters. As in many cities, black leaders are anxious to exercise the power of the ballot to achieve their goals, namely, electing officials who will serve their interests.
The black community cannot, in most situations, elect people. We can defeat. We can see that someone doesn't get elected, you know, but to say put somebody in office, it's very, very, very difficult.
Are you afraid of alienating your white allies by fighting the charter?
No. Basically, you know, most whites don't understand. They feel that they can represent us as good as anybody else, you know, and it's not true, but they feel that we are just in a way of progress, and it's not true. And we are not trying to, you know, stop progress. That's what, you know, that's what we've been accused of doing, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to get proper representation.
Not only are blacks in Lafayette fighting to maintain the representation they now have, they also hope that one day soon they'll have a district where a black can be elected to the state legislature.
You know, Genevieve, the first step to getting minorities involved in the political process is getting them registered to vote. The voting power of minorities has been called by some the sleeping giant of American politics, but that is changing. You see, over the last 2 years, we have witnessed a lot of hostility toward the Reagan administration. Hostility that has awakened many minority voters and intensified their interest in voting. Some people say the power of the ballot is the only clout blacks have. If that is true, it is clout that blacks fought long and hard for. So hard that in 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed into law the Voting Rights Act, abolishing literacy, knowledge, and character tests as qualifications for voting, particularly here in the South where those voting practices were very prevalent. Last year, the state NAACP and the Legislative Black Caucus sponsored a 250-mile march from Shreveport to Baton Rouge in an attempt to register 350,000 new black voters. The march was coordinated by Ben Jeffers. Jeffers recognized the need to register blacks to vote following his unsuccessful bid in 1979 to become Louisiana's Secretary of State.
I learned during that time that the unregistered black person in the state is a gigantic number. At that time, we had not had the benefit of the 1980 census, so we didn't realize that it was over 350,000 unregistered black people at that time. So, but moving around from community to community, we did come in contact with a large number of people that didn't know what voting was all about. So we had our first experience during that time with the unregistered black person.
Do you think that it's possible for a black to be elected to a statewide office?
Certainly, I think it's possible. I think my own candidacy showed that a black candidate can be taken seriously. We were very fortunate during that time to become a major candidate, and I find that in Louisiana's politics, that's one of the first hurdles. If you're not looked at or perceived as being a major candidate, then you won't get your campaign off the ground. We were fortunate enough to gather several major newspapers' endorsements in the state, which kind of gave our candidacy credibility. We had several district attorneys in the state to endorse us. A former governor endorsed us. People like this made the candidacy very seriously.
Many Louisiana cities have had problems electing blacks to citywide positions, but Fred Pitcher Jr. made history in Baton Rouge recently when he was elected city judge, making him the first black to win a citywide election in Baton Rouge.
As a judge, I plan to represent all of the people, and I hope to do a good job. And maybe through doing that good job, I can in turn change some ideas about how people perceive other people.
Freddie Pitcher is an extremely good attorney. He has the respect of his colleagues. You know, he was appointed by the Supreme Court, for example, to serve as an ad hoc judge. These kinds of things, I think, was the key to his winning support among the white community, and certainly that helped to get him elected.
The bottom line on the whole thing, when people look at qualifications, that's it. We're trying to transcend color barriers, and if I do a good job, then I'm sure that there are well-meaning white people who didn't vote for me who would then come to perceive blacks as people who can do jobs for everybody. And that's what I'm all about, trying to represent everybody. And hopefully it will open up some doors.
Governor Dave Treen feels that he has opened up some doors. Last September, his administration put out this booklet where the governor talks about his commitment to black Louisianians. In it, the governor says that he has, quote, placed minority citizens in high-level cabinet positions and on important policy-making boards and commissions in greater numbers than in the entire 8 years of the previous administration, unquote. One of Treen's appointments is Thomas Jasper. He is Special Assistant to the Governor for the Office of Minority Affairs. We also have with us today Lee Wesley, who is the Executive Director of the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus. Gentlemen, welcome to Folks. Mr. Jasper, let me begin with you. Minority Affairs, that's such an ambiguous term. What exactly is the Office of Minority Affairs, and as a Special Assistant to the Governor, what are your responsibilities?
Well, Minority Affairs really run the gamut. Anything that relates to minority affairs, minority business, anything that minorities may be involved in would come under that office. We may not handle it directly, but we do have the authority to refer to proper sources.
Now, I'm sure you're familiar with this little booklet that was put out last September about the governor's commitment to black Louisianians. And if one thumbs through it, you'll be very well impressed with all the number of appointments the governor has made since he's been in office.
Yes.
How much power do those people who hold these different positions, how much power do they have, or is it just window dressing?
To my knowledge, to my complete knowledge, all the individuals appointed in this administration has complete authority and power that goes along with the appointment with that particular office. I don't know of anyone that's serving in a window dressing position.
Lee, as we beginning to go into the legislative session coming up in a few weeks, what are the concerns of the Black Caucus?
Well, one of the biggest concerns will be the budget that the governor has submitted to the Legislative Budget Committee. Most of the cuts, or just about all of the cuts, come in those areas that directly affect the constituency of the blacks both in the House and the Senate. And of course the Black Caucus will be fighting to get some of those cuts restored. If the budget is allowed to stand as submitted by the governor, it would virtually wipe out the community centers across the state and grossly affect some of the other social service programs.
Lee, in the 1980 presidential election, many people felt that the Democratic Party took the labor vote for granted, and 50% of it was lost to Reagan. Do you feel that the Democratic Party is taking the black vote for granted?
Without a doubt. I think the Democratic Party has assumed that blacks are more in tune with the thinking of the Democratic nominee and almost will automatically vote for that nominee. I hope, however, that past elections have taught them that this is not necessarily the case, and that Democrats, black Democrats, want to be and must be an integral part of the Democratic Party, and that means a part of the policy-making decisions, or we will have to give our attention in some other direction.
Mr. Jasper, there are an increasing number of black Republicans, although they're still a small group. What about the black politician? Is he actively recruited and financed and supported by the party?
By the Republican Party? To my knowledge, yes. The black candidates are supported in the same fashion as the others of the Caucasian race. I don't know of any real difference that has been made between black candidates and those of the other race.
Are black candidates, Republican candidates, experiencing much success in actually being elected?
Well, there's a lot of contingencies involved when you're talking about election. It depends upon a lot of things. How viable the candidate is, how saleable the candidate may be, and what are the issues involved. What is his opponent's record? And you will find that in different instances, different candidates will win, irrespective of party designation or party affiliations. It's getting to be nowadays, it's not necessarily party versus party, but individual versus individual.
Lee, let me back up to this pamphlet. I'm sure you're aware of this booklet that the Treen Administration has put out. What is the caucus's reaction to the number of appointments, black appointments the governor has made since he's been in office?
I think the pamphlet is a good information piece. It says who has been appointed. It says how many blacks have been appointed. But beyond being simply an information piece, I think that's all it is. Mr. Jasper said a few minutes ago, to his knowledge, the blacks who are appointed in those positions have all of the authority that go along with the particular appointment. I think in general, though, it's obvious to me and to the members of the Black Caucus, most of them anyway, that the blacks in the Treen Administration have no real impact on the decisions of that administration. If they did, then the cuts that have been proposed by Governor Treen, I don't think would have been proposed. You can take one of those departments, the Department of Urban and Community Affairs, that has a black secretary. For the last 3 sessions, the governor has been trying to abolish that particular department. The department in state government that has direct responsibility for the many social service programs across the state of Louisiana that service so many black people and poor people. If that black secretary had any real impact on the Treen Administration, I don't think the administration would be fighting so hard to abolish that particular department.
So are you saying that the Treen Administration really doesn't have a commitment to black Louisianians?
I would think not. I have not seen that commitment. And I think you judge that by the programs that are proposed by a particular administration. And if you look at what Treen has proposed and the needs of the black community, it does not indicate that a real commitment is there.
Well, I'm sure the Office of Minority Affairs would take exception to that.
Oh, quite definitely I would take an exception to that. I'm quite aware of the fact that the Treen Administration does have a commitment to the black community. With respect to the Department of Urban and Community Affairs being eliminated, it's not necessarily that the department be retained, but necessarily that the services be retained. I hate particularly to get into the situation where we're worried about who's going to deliver service as to whether or not the services are going to be delivered. I think ultimately we ought to be concerned about the delivery of services as opposed to the individual who delivers the service. The Cost Control Commission recommend that the department be eliminated. It has been recommended that the department be eliminated. However, all of the services that DUCA is now performing, of course, will be taken over by another department. And no one can say at this point, if another department take it over, it will not be administered by still another minority, another black.
Lee, let me ask you something. Without Democratic support, both in the state legislature and in the National Congress, the Republican cutbacks would not have come into fruition. So without this Democratic support for cutbacks, they wouldn't have come about. Wasn't this a slap in the face to the black Democratic voters that many Democrats?
Very much so. Without the support of Democrats, Treen would not be governor today. There aren't enough Republicans in the state of Louisiana to elect the Republican governor. So the only way he could have won would have been, and was in fact, with the support of many Democrats. Same thing true with President Reagan. Perhaps those who label themselves as Democrats are simply wearing the Democratic label when in actuality they are practicing Republicans. And I think that's true of many people in the state of Louisiana, thus the election of David Treen.
Well, if black voters can't get what they want from the Democratic Party, then what course of action would you suggest they recommend?
There has been some discussion of an all-black party that I don't necessarily agree with. I don't think that's the route to go. I think if we would flex our muscles enough within the Democratic Party, we would get most, if not all, of those things that we want. Of course, the underlying answer is for blacks to register in large numbers and to vote full strength. Once we do that, we'll get more attention both from the Democratic and the Republican Party.
You wouldn't suggest that more of them register as independents and play the wait-and-see game and see which party would vie more for their votes?
No, I don't think it matters how they register, to tell you the truth, as long as they are registered and that potential is out there in terms of their actual vote.
Mr. Jasper, what will the Office of Minority Affairs be working towards this legislative session coming up?
Well, I've been asked this question before, and as in the past, we will work toward those types of legislation that would be of interest and a benefit to the black community. Exactly what at this particular time, I cannot say. In fact, I will not say, because they're still filing bills, and if I were to say so on this program, the next day you would have equal amount of bills filed to combat whatever we have filed with respect to legislation. But we will be working, and we work in conjunction with the caucus. I'm a former member of the caucus, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm still a member of the caucus. That's one thing. I cannot be anything other than black, so I don't have any choice. And I'm not just black from the outside, I'm black from within, which is, of course, altogether different. So my interest has to be in the best interest of black people, because there's nothing else for me to be.
That was going to be my next question. How would you assess your relationship with the Legislative Black Caucus? And Lee, how would you assess the caucus's relationship with the Office of Minority Affairs?
We've had a very good working relationship with all of the blacks in the Treen Administration. That doesn't mean we agree on most issues. We disagree, as a matter of fact, on most issues. But as far as the exchange of information, the exchange of ideas, and a cooperative spirit, certainly we have that because we are all black. But in terms of our philosophy, in terms of our positions on issues, we differ most of the time. I suppose one of the most crucial issues that point that up is in the special session, the issues of the unemployment compensation legislation and workman's comp legislation. The blacks in the Treen Administration were supportive of Treen's position, and of course we were just on the opposite end. We did have one or two members of the caucus that voted with Treen, but by and large the majority of the caucus members disagreed with the legislation. But again, the cooperation was there.
How about y'all? How about you?
Well, Governor Treen has never demanded or required that you agree with him. But if you're an employee, and if you're going to be a loyal employee, then it's right that you support whatever position that is finally adopted. I'm no different from anyone else. The same as when I served in the legislature. I may not agree with all of the legislation that was voted in the affirmative. However, if that's the expression of the legislature, which ended up being an expression of the people's will, then of course I will adopt that expression also.
We're friendly adversaries, I suppose.
In other words, the majority still rules. And if you want to be an antagonist, of course, you can maintain your position. But if something has ran the gamut according to our system, and you're on the losing side, I don't see any reason to be on the losing side, to remain on the losing side, simply because you want to be on the losing sides and become an antagonist. That's not my position. It's not my philosophy at all.
If Governor Treen does away with the Department of Urban and Community Affairs, this will do away with the black cabinet member, a black that will be in a very visible position. Does he have any plans to appoint another black person to as visible a position of equal power?
Let me explain this to you. I think I should. First of all, the amount of positions in state government was legislated. There are 20 departments. It's not anything that Treen himself or whoever is governor can just by executive order wipe away with. It must be voted on by the entire legislature, that's both houses. They will determine if they eliminate any department, the departments they have now, anyone's going to be eliminated, what will replace it, because our Constitution says there shall be 20 departments within government. So if Department of Urban and Community Affairs is done away with, then only the legislature can decide at that time what agency will replace it and what agency will adopt or will take on the responsibilities. Treen, of course, will appoint the department head. I'm quite certain that the records will reflect that Treen has given more departmental heads to minorities than have in the past. Therefore, I'm certain he's not going to let his record reflect that he has decreased one that he has already appointed or given to the minorities.
So you're saying that, in other words, if there is a department that replaces Urban and Community Affairs, you feel as though a black would stand a good chance of being appointed to that position or to one comparable to it, should it arise?
I'm saying that one, well, what I know about Treen, he would appoint one to the new position because he has set the record. I don't think he would decrease his record because it would mean that his commitment to the black community has been lessened.
It seems as if some black leaders are reticent about coming out and openly supporting either Edwards or Treen in the upcoming gubernatorial election. It seems as if they're sort of waiting and sitting back to see what the track records are, certainly with Treen, and they know what Edwards' track record is, but really just to see exactly what their platforms are going to be, what stances they're going to take. Am I right in this, or?
Yes, it's still early. The campaign really has not gotten on the way, and I think it would not be wise to take a position this early in the campaign. As the issues are defined and as the candidates state their positions on the particular issues, then you find blacks lining up either one way or the other way. One of the basic questions back to the issue of the Department of Urban and Community Affairs is, one, why get rid of it in the first place? And if the real reason is to save money in terms of what the Cost Control Commission is saying, then it would appear to me that they wouldn't turn right around and create another department. So if another department is not created, there is no position to appoint a black to. And I think it's those kind of issues that will be clarified during the campaign, and as they are made clear, and both Treen and Edwards state their position on those issues, blacks will line up behind one candidate or the other. Of course, I have my own ideas as how the line will go, but you know, that remains to be seen.
Do you think our black leaders are being more sophisticated by withholding their support and waiting and seeing what the candidates are going to say and do?
Very much so. If you recall back in 1971, when Edwards first ran, a lot of blacks very early jumped on either the Edwards bandwagon or the bandwagon of Bennett Johnston, blacks primarily in the northern end of the state. And it was a new day for us. We were just getting really heavily involved in state politics. We've come a long way since 1972, and we know a lot now about state government that we did not know then. So we won't make the early mistakes that we made 10 years ago, 12 years ago.
Some people say the ballot, the power of the ballot is the only clout that blacks have. Do the two of you agree with that?
I don't think it's the only power that the blacks has. It is a very significant power. It has been said that there are basically 5 tools of power: the Bible, the boycott, the buck, the bullet, and the ballot. As a people, we have learned quite well how to use the Bible in terms of relying on it and our faith that has brought us through a lot of troublesome times. I think during the early 60s, the 70s, we used the boycott quite well. And as a result of that, the federal government and state government passed a lot of laws that did away with segregation in terms of public accommodations. We don't control the buck, so we can't use that. We don't control the bullet, so we can't use that. The only one we got left is the ballot, and it is very powerful. Unfortunately, again, we have not registered at full strength, so we cannot use that potential power with the ballot that we really have, and until we register at full strength, it will sort of be a potential power.
We only have a couple of minutes left. There is a lot of apathy among black voters. What is the caucus doing to change that, and what is the Office of Minority Affairs doing to change that?
It is our belief that the great amount of apathy that exists among black voters is simply because of a lack of information, the lack of knowledge. When you speak to a lot of blacks who are not registered, or even those who are registered and fail to vote, they will quite commonly express that my vote doesn't make a difference, will not make a difference. Until such time we're able to educate the black community, in addition to registering and voting, I don't think we will ever be able to reach the fullness of our potential with respect to the black vote.
I agree with Jasper. Education, I think, is the key. Blacks need to fully understand and appreciate how the political process really works and how it affects their daily lives. And the other problem is that of lack of confidence in public officials. So many broken promises, and after that happens so many times, you just lose confidence. So education and restoring confidence in public officials, I think, are the key things that must be done.
Very quickly, what do you see for the 80s? 2 words.
Progress.
You, Mr. Jasper?
Progress.
That sounds wonderful.
All the way.
We'd like to thank Thomas Jasper and Lee Wesley for being with us today. Next week on Folks, our program will center on the relationship between the police and the black community.
And in 2 weeks, we'll be jazzing up the studio with a little jazz and blues. Until next time, so long.
Funding for the production of Folks is provided in part by the Friends of LPB.